Hi, and welcome to the last education session for Launch Rural Nevada 2022. I'm Maggie Saling with StartUpNV, and we're here to talk about pitch decks 101, everything that should be in them, and a lot of stuff that shouldn't. And we are looking at a 10-minute pitch in here. Your pitch for Launch Rural Nevada will be a shorter pitch than that, so you'll have to cut some information out or just go through it more quickly. Let's get going. The pitch deck is probably the first time that many people are going to come in contact with your company. When I say the pitch deck, I mean your pitch deck, but you should have more than one. You should have a deck that you present with because it's going to be different from one that you might send to people. The one that you send to people, they're not going to have the benefit of your color, your narration, the way that you would enhance the slides. So there can be more information on those slides. When you're giving a presentation live, you don't want a lot of distraction on your slides. You want people listening to you. This is your chance to tell your story about why you started the business and why you think it's got great potential and why you're solving a great need. So let's get going. We're going to cover both content and style, not so much on style. We're going to really focus on content. You should know your audience when you're preparing your deck. And when I say 2 decks, you really should have a bunch of decks. It's not a static thing. You don't make it once and then consider yourself done. People really do appreciate, and they will know if you have customized your deck for them as an audience. One of the reasons I say to know your audience is because if you are dealing with a room full of accredited investors, you can be more specific and give out more information about your financials and your ask. And if you're in a mixed audience, if you're not sure, you have to be careful about what you say because there are SEC laws around what you can say. So just keep that in mind. We're going to cover 8 to 10 things that should be in your slide deck. Again, it depends on who your audience is. Overall, though, we want one idea per slide. We want very large fonts, and we want very few words. The reason you want large fonts is that if you're in a large room, and especially now, even if there aren't that many people in the room, but they're doing social distancing, you want the people in the back of the room to be able to see the slides with no problems. A lot of angel investors are not spring chickens anymore, and so they have to wear glasses, and it makes it harder to see small print or not high contrast print. So putting red letters on a gray background, if there's not a lot of contrast, that can be very difficult to see from a distance. So these are the basic slides that we want to see addressed. Again, these are just kind of introductory slides. The purpose of your pitch is to get to the next meeting. And in the next meeting, you're going to go into deeper detail. As you gain time for your presentation, you're able to cover more things. But the arc overall of your slides should be about your story. It should be compelling. It should be personal. People should be able to relate to it. Then you do want to cover the content items that we have here in the slides. What is the problem that caused you to start this business? You came up with a solution, obviously. What's your market opportunity? How big can your business grow? The business model is how you're selling, who's paying, and how much they're paying. Competition, of course, is everybody else is trying to do the same thing, or even if you're doing something new, it's the moment of inertia. You have to get over people not doing anything to get them to do what you want them to do. And then traction, this is a slide that you will include if you have it, and you won't include it if you don't. People always want to know about the team. They want to know about the people. People invest in people and ideas, but people are more important than the actual idea. And then lastly, we have the ask. We'll talk about that more as we go. So let's just dig in. The problem. With the problem, less is more. We've seen many people spend much too much time on explaining the problem. If it takes more than 4 slides to explain a problem, it's really not a problem. It's not something that's instantly relatable. So when you're devising your problem slide, you do want to hone in on that thing that caused you to say, there's got to be a better way, and then come up with that better way. You're only going to spend a minute on the problem. Again, we're talking about a 10-minute pitch. So you're going to spend 1 minute on the problem. And if you can use pictures to demonstrate what the problem is, that's great. You can always add color, and I do recommend that you do add color to whatever your pictures are showing. So I have now an example of a poor problem slide. There's a lot of words on this test. The first bullet point, though, 1 in 2 people have cancer in their lifetime. Okay, that's a real eye-opener. And then there's all this blah, blah, blah about something. So I've remade this slide into something that's easily relatable. 1 in 2 people will get cancer. Would you like to know what kind in advance? Okay, so that's what this company could do. This company had a way of testing to determine whether you had certain genes turned on or off, and that would lead to specific kinds of cancer. So I have another good example now of a problem slide. Overheating is a real problem. Well, this particular company had a product that would keep men's nether regions cool. So cars overheat, and apparently men overheat too. And then their solution was this kind of seated ring that was cool. But I love the illustration. It's very relatable. Now here's the solution. This is your bread and butter. So you're going to spend a little bit more time on this. Use pictures if you have them, but don't demo your product. If your product is a food product and you're meeting with investors, definitely bring samples. Food samples always go over well. But if it's a phone app and you're picking up your phone and you're saying, this is what we do, that is totally boring and people can't relate to that. I wouldn't use screenshots unless they really advance the story. Usually screenshots are so small that it's very hard to tell what's going on with them. But one thing you have to cover in your solution is why it's 10 times better than the status quo, than anything else that's out there. That's really going to get people to pay attention. So here I have an example of a poor solution slide. There are just tons of words on here, and I'm not sure what they're trying to say. And here is the main point that I stress over and over again. When people are reading, they're not listening. And they can read much faster than you can speak. So what happens is they read it, they pick up their phone and they check their messages, they check Twitter, they move on to other things. So your slides have the job of holding their attention, and your voice adds color to what's on the slide. Your voice is what's really holding their attention by explaining what's happening in the slide. This one has a screenshot. The picture's good, but I'd rather just have that picture there and then you tell me about what your solution is. Now I have a decent example for you. This is High Bear, the all-day adventure flask. Mark gave me permission to use this slide. It's an all-day adventure flask and it has all of these features. So he's showing these exploded views. He can talk about what each different part of this device does. It's a little bit wordy in the Tahoe base built to travel. Can't read that part there. I wouldn't even include it. But the rest of this is a really good slide. Next up, we have the market. The market tells investors how big this opportunity could be for you, for your solution. So we already did a little seminar on TAM, SAM, and SOM. And the reason you want to understand the total addressable market, the service available, and the obtainable market is so that you can show a roadmap to what the greatest potential is. But when you show your market, you want to be talking about your first market and how long you think it's going to take to get there. So you're kind of putting a box around your market. For TAM is the whole thing, and your SOM is what you intend to do, the amount you expect to penetrate within a time period, 1 to 2 years, 3 to 5 years, whatever it is. You want to work on that so that you have realistic figures, and you
shouldn't use anything like this is the whole market, and if we get just 1/10 of 1% of that market, then we'll make X amount of dollars. Nobody believes that, and it seems like you didn't take the time to really understand your market. And I said last time when we did do TAM, SAM, and SOM, you should really want to know so that you know you're not wasting your time. So it's not only for the investors to know that you've spent the time to figure out what your market is, but you've done the research so that you know that you are putting your blood, sweat, and tears into a realistic view of what can happen. So here we have an example of a market slide. I guess this is all one idea, but there's so much going on here that I really don't even know where to look. I get that 10,000 people are turning 65, all these baby boomers, every day. And then 52% of them are going to need care. I don't know what this graph on the right is showing me. Maybe it is showing me that it's 10,000 people per day and it gets exponentially larger. I don't know. I remade this slide to show what I think are the salient points here. There's 10,000 people per day. They're going to turn 65. Over half of them are going to need long-term care in facilities. And that means that the number of long-term beds goes from 2.7 million in 10 years to 5 million. So it almost doubles. So that was their product. I have another example I consider to be a pretty good example. We have this little rocket on the right, which shows kind of subliminally explosive growth. And then they use the stacked Venn diagram that I prefer with the TAM, SAM, and SOM. And then on the left, they're adding a little bit of color about the number of people and contractors that this will service. So in the Venn diagram, we have dollars, and over on the left, we have some information about the number of customers they're expecting. Next up, we have business model. The business model is what you're selling, who you're selling it to, and what you're charging. So if you want to go into how you're reaching your target market, that can be critical to your type of business model. For example, a software as a service. From there, you can either be business to business or you could be business to consumer. Okay. With that, we would also know what you're charging. You're going to spend 1 to 1.5 minutes on this. So the solution and the business model are going to be the things you actually spend a pretty decent amount of time on, more than these other topics. I have an example. This one is a poor one. I actually did receive this slide in a deck, and they considered this their business model. What it is a list of potential customers. And then at the bottom, they say that they see 2 revenue streams from a portion of ticket sales by the convention, as well as selling advertising. So this doesn't give me any information about their business model, and I won't bother telling you what they were trying to do. They did not have a thorough understanding of how their business was going to work. I have another poor example of revenue models. There's a lot going on in this slide. There's a ton of text on the left side. There's a table on the right side, and you have to really read it to figure out that they're going to charge a subscription rate of anywhere from $2.99 to $16.99 a month. It still doesn't, I have no idea who they're selling this to. So I couldn't even attempt to remake this one. Here is another decent example of a business model. Here the company had 2 different customers that they were going after. They were going after individuals for $19 per year, very clear. They were also going after some businesses, and they had very variable pricing on the businesses, $29 per year to $1,000 per year. And that would depend on the amount of users they were going to have. So this is not a complete business model slide. We would need another slide to really describe what they thought they were going to be able to do in terms of the individual users and the business users. And here is a direct consumer product. I consider this to be a good slide. I might make it more attractive, but at least what they've done here is they've showed us what the pricing is for the various sizes. They've given us the wholesale and the cost to manufacture. So we can look at this and we can figure out okay, they're making a pretty good margin on this. And it's just really easy to understand. The next thing you want to talk about is your competition. And don't you dare tell me that there isn't any. Even Henry Ford, when he started mass producing automobiles, you know, new tech, people were using horse and buggy. And so their competitor for Ford was people staying with what they already knew. They already had a bunch of hay to feed the horses for the next year. So you really have to understand what your competition is, and then you can make a comparison about how your product is better. And I like to see that in a rack up, which is a grid. I'll show you some examples like that. You're only going to spend a minute on this, but this is one of the areas where people who are in the pitch meeting with you will take their phone and they will look for competitors. So you really need to know who your competitors are. And if you're doing a price comparison, you should check it often for accuracy. So you can't do that one time and just expect it to be the same 6 months later. It's not going to be. Okay, here we have an example of somebody who did a very good job of understanding. Well, he picked who his competitors were. This was a fellow who wanted to start a samurai league. So he wanted to create these teams of samurai, and they would compete and work towards a big tournament at the end to pick a winner. So he picked professional sports. He knew he would have to take eyeballs from other existing sports. And he targeted the NBA and NHL as being very fast-moving sort of strategy games. He also figured he could go after college sports leagues as well. So here we're going to have a rack-up card. Now, this is again from High Bear. And High Bear, with a rack-up card, you either want to put yourself to the left or to the right. You don't want to be in the middle. And you want to show that the features that you have are more extensive than your competitors. And again, here's something where you actually do need to know this, because if you just can't compete, if somebody else has a better product, then don't waste your time, wait for your next idea. So here he's got his thumbs up stuff. It's a slightly larger icon than the other ones. The other ones are sort of grayed out. Here we have another rack up where it's similar in that the check mark for all the products that Stern has, or all the features that Stern has, are bigger, they're in a brighter color, they're easier to see, and the competitors are in a smaller X, like, nope, they don't have that stuff. Another way to do this is to actually not put the X's in for them not having it, just leave it blank. So the only thing that has a lot of information on it is your rack. All right, traction. I said earlier that traction is going to be a slide that we only have, or that we only put in if we have it. Let me clarify that. If you have sales traction, oh my gosh, by all means, put that in there. If you're making great progress with a beta and you've got testers and it's growing, that is traction. Even though you're not making any money yet, you're showing that you're able to gain customer share, that there's interest in what you're doing. If you're in a really early stage and you haven't even gotten a product yet, then just skip this. People will understand that. If you're going to show growth, use month over month or year over year, depending on how long you've been at it. And if you can, tell us about your cost to acquire a customer, your CAC, and your lifetime value, and also your customer retention. Those are things that are going to really interest your investors. So here we have a traction slide with strong retention. So she frames it by actually saying there's traction and retention. And she's also putting her second purchase figure in there. So she's retaining, or she's getting customers to repeat buy, 80% of them. It's amazing. Next, we have the team slide. The team slide is important because investors invest in people. The idea is somewhat important, but knowing that the people can bring this across the finish line, that's what people buy into. So it's your key team players. I wouldn't show more than 4 people. I would show pictures. Pictures can really sell something. And your bullet points, which should be limited under each person, should demonstrate why you're trustworthy and why people should believe that you'll be able to get this job done. So the team slide is going to be kind of brief, although some people think it's really, really important. And so you should be prepared to answer any sort of questions. So I have a poor example for you. This is a poor example for a couple of reasons. Remember I said we're going to have one idea per slide? Well, this one tries to incorporate the business model, also how they're making money, and then for the team, even though I asked this person several times to show a picture and describe the two people who are important in this venture, she refused to put any pictures in there, and she gave no reason for anyone to trust that they knew what they were doing. She also included the app developers, which for an app, that means that she didn't have a technical co-founder, and it meant that any kind of changes that she wanted to make to her app were going to have to go through this other company. And to me, that's a red flag. Other people are more willing to forgive that. But I mean, if you have a technical product, for me, you better have a technical co-founder so that you can iterate quickly. And now I have another poor example for you. These two people were doing an app and they refused to add their last names. And I was wondering if it was because they were working for other people and they didn't want somebody to check their LinkedIn profile to see who they were working for. But here, what I like to see is if you guys went to good schools or you've worked for banner companies, just include their logo. It's much easier to understand. There's not all these words. I really don't want to know what your mission in life is for this. I want to believe that you can do it. And so mission is fine, but it's not something that I really want to see on a slide. You can take a second to tell me about it. But remember, we're only spending half a minute on this. And now I have a good example for you on the team slide. These two guys started a company. They're in both Las Vegas and Illinois. The one guy has PhDs, worked for a great company, Caterpillar. The guy from Vegas worked for Zappos, so he's been through the whole startup grind. They look personable. I believe they can get it done. So this is a great slide to me. Okay, lastly, we're going to have the ask slide. Now, once again, let me reiterate that you need to know who your audience is. If they're not all accredited, then you can give an amount that you're looking to gain in an investment, but you can't give any sort of terms. If you know that they are all accredited, you may even consider putting your ask up front as one of the first slides. And that kind of gives a frame of reference for the investors who are listening to your pitch. Now, I'm sure you've seen Shark Tank. Shark Tank always has the first thing out of their mouths being what they're looking for. And then it goes into what their company is all about. We just love to watch, these people come out and say, we're looking for $1 million for 2% of the company. And Mark Cuban just rolls his eyes and stops listening. So having that information up front is very helpful to investors so they can understand where you're coming from. And if you're quoting numbers like that and you don't have a huge TAM, there's no reason for you to be there. So this is only going to be about 30 seconds, but it's important to include some information. This is a poor example. At the end of the day, that is a trite expression. I don't know why it's on this slide. I understand there's a $sign there, but you have to read through all of those little words to find out that the guy's looking for $400,000 and that he's going to cover expenses for initial startup. Well, even just saying covering expenses for initial startup, that's not enough information. Here's one. Now, this is an actually decent looking slide. It's got this rather hefty artwork on the bottom, but it's a nice frame. And if all of the slides are this clean, it would be fine. They want $275,000. $245,000 of it is for salaries, $20,000 for marketing, $5,000 for employee benefits. Well, most people are going to categorize benefits as part of salaries. And at $5,000, that's like 2%. That's not enough for actual benefits. So these people may be looking for 275,000, 250,000 of which is going to go to people and only 20,000 for marketing. There's not a lot of investors that are going to do that. So I have one more poor example. This guy, you can see he sent this his deck to us because it says he's looking for $300,000 from StartUpNV to start and to continue to sell the device in Nevada and the 49 other states. But this is not enough information. And you don't take just the ask slide out of context. You take it with the whole deck. So you're hoping that when they get to this point, it's like, oh, okay. So they're gaining some traction. With a little bit of money, they'll be able to, get to the next milestone for development, or they'll be able to get the next 1,000 customers. You want something to make sense for the investor to say, oh, okay, that seems reasonable. I have another example, which is better. Key financial figures is not really a good title for this, but at least we can see that they're seeking $500,000 for 12% as equity or preferred stock. The graph on the left is trying to explain the use of funds, but that's impossible to see. We've got a dark background, we've got darkish colors, we've got little tiny numbers, and then the legend is inside with black on dark blue, and that's just impossible. He also tells us about his exit strategy by looking to be acquired. I remade this one. So here we have, this is the ask. His logo should be on each slide. This is $500,000 for 12% equity or preferred stock. And then I've blown up the percentages over here on the right to actually make sense of them. I mean, I use the colors. It actually could be clearer too, but this is clearer than it was. And then we have one more example. This is one that I used to say, oh, okay, this is clear. I really understand this, right? The target raise is 600,000, use of funds. But there's just a little bit too much information on this slide that doesn't need to be there. It means he can still say it, but it doesn't need to be there. So cleaning up this slide looks like this. The target is 600,000. He's already got 400K committed. For his use of funds, 70% of it is going to marketing and sales, and 30% is going to technology enhancements. He's got exit strategy on here, so then he can talk briefly about that. This is a slide that's easily understandable from the back of the room, and it gets the message across. Your last slide should be a thank you slide, which should have company logo, company contact. You can have the words thank you, or you can just say thank you. And then in smaller letters, you can repeat your ask, because this is a slide that is probably going to be left up on a screen if you're in a room as you answer questions, or hopefully if it's in a Zoom situation like this, that the host will allow you to leave that up there for a while. In pitch settings in person, I've seen people just take pictures of this last slide, which is why you want to make sure you have your contact information, and that's why it can be important to add your little ask there. Because if somebody's listening to a bunch of pitches, it makes it easier for them to make reference to their notes and to their phone picture of this last slide. We're almost done, folks. Okay, for style. I don't spend a ton of time on this, but generally speaking, you want large fonts and you want no serifs. Serifs are the little tails on the letters that make them fancy. When you're trying to read something from a distance, it's easier to read plain fonts, fonts without serifs. You should have your logo on each slide. I don't believe in animations at all. No animations as you're building a slide. Try to avoid doing that. No animations between slides, because it's just a distraction and you don't really need to add that. I personally don't like page numbers. Some investors do, because as they're watching, they're taking notes and they wrote down, instead of the chart title or the chart topic, they're writing down the page number. This can be especially true though if you're in your second pitch, where you're going to have more numbers on your slides. In that case, it is really helpful to have the page numbers. I would caution against using video. Videos will work in 8 out of 10 presentations, but the one that you really want that investor because you think there's going to be a good match, it's not going to work in that presentation. So remember, one idea per slide, very simple charts. If you're using photos, only about 2 photos per slide, unless your slide is a montage of everything and it enhances the story, it moves the story forward, and you're just talking over it. I wouldn't use a montage to give 6 different examples of the problem. The problem should be more obvious than that. Thank you. I'm Maggie Saling.